Have you ever felt like choosing a niche is the hardest decision ever? Like you have so many ideas and committing to one feels impossible because you don't want to exclude anyone, you don't want to pick the wrong thing, and honestly, it feels like once you commit, there's no turning back. Is this sense of finality. And if this is you, let me tell you, you are not alone. But today I want to reframe this whole conversation, and instead of seeing a niche as a limiting box, I want to show you how you can explore, how you can experiment and let your niche find you. And it sounds very esoteric, but I promise it's not. Because the truth is, you don't get clarity by thinking about it, you get clarity by creating. Hi, friend. Welcome to Content Marketing for Entrepreneurs. Want to market your business without burning out? Are you tired of spending way too much time just trying to stay consistent online? I'm Eugenia, but you can call me E. I'll show you how to create a sustainable way to show up online. Let's make content creation easier and way more fun. Grab your coffee and let's dive right in. Okay, did you know that the best way to stay connected is to join my email community at bit.ly/EWU Insider? That is my weekly email to you. That's my love letter. Like, hey, let's check in. What's up? What's new? What's happening in the industry? What's happening in my life? And the best way to receive early offers, early news, and of course, the direct link to the weekly episode, because I know we have so many notifications that keeping up with everything that's tugging at our attention feels a little bit like too much of a hassle sometimes. So I want to make it simple for you. Everything is within that weekly email. And that is my favorite piece of content, really. Well, I love this podcast. Like, this is always going to be my queen. But I've been really loving the emails. I've been loving them so much, and I would love to share them with you. So you can join for free at bit.ly/EWU Insider. That's bit.ly/EWOO Insider. And everything is going to be linked down below in the show notes for your convenience if you're driving right now. But I would love to see you there. This whole having too many ideas and being afraid to commit to a niche and having literal anxiety, I know this because I have been there. And for years, to be honest, I let the fear of choosing the wrong thing paralyze me. And it is ironic, but it didn't just keep me from making progress. It actually made me more scattered than I actually was. Like, I felt like I was worse than I was. I was overthinking so much. And now looking back, I'm like, girl, you were fine. So let me give you a little tour down memory lane. When I was in college, I was an actor. Like, I was going to college, but my main thing was acting. And that's what I wanted to do. So when I moved to the US, I thought that I would go into that path, but it didn't work out that way. So I ended up following a more traditional, a more corporate path. And while I was good at it, I felt creatively unfulfilled. I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. Like, I was too much for every space I was doing live in because I was too creative for a more structured environment. So I started searching for outlets, and that's when the whole niche struggle began, because all the advice I was hearing was, you need to choose a niche before you launch anything, before you talk about anything. So I first launched a blog, Living Grit, and it was all about living a passionate life. So it was kind of a behind the scenes look at how I was figuring things out as a student. I was doing my MBA at the time, working, trying to find out what I loved. And I enjoyed that, even though it wasn't very sustainable long term. I think that has been my number one problem. But then I launched one of the first podcasts in Spanish. I'm very proud of this. It was De Vinos y Otros Cuentos, or Wine and Other Stories. I loved doing that. And that podcast went through so many different partners and co-hosts. But my main goal was to really empower women through meaningful conversations. And I know that sounds super common and even cliche now, but back in 2017, no one was really talking about it. It was crazy. So then I started a short-lived podcast in English. It was very similar to de Vinos y Otros Cuentos, but this one was specifically for Latinas. Like it was Vino Break, it was in English, but it was for Latinas. So that was very short lived. And then I launched Fairly Bold. And that podcast was, I would say, the more intellectually deep of everything I had created so far. And I was exploring the intersection between femininity and power because back in 2020, it felt like the world was telling women that we couldn't be leaders while still embracing our femininity. So I wanted to just talk about things like leadership and power and intuition and even faith and marriage, like all these things where we can lead from a place of femininity. Right now, again, that's a more mainstream conversation, but it wasn't 5 years ago. But after that podcast, it was my first like really long-term podcast, all in English. It was a little bit of a struggle to be fluid in that language, to be honest. I was not doing a lot of interview. Well, I was doing some interviews, but I was also doing a lot of solo episodes. So it was taking me, I would say, like 4 to 6 hours to produce each episode. It was a lot. And I burned out, also comparison. And I felt so much shame because I thought I was all over the place. Like I was looking at everything I had done throughout the years. And I was like, man, who's going to look at me and, take me seriously because I've been all over the place. But in time, I realized something. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. Like you cannot connect them looking forward. And what felt like random ideas and random niches actually made a lot of sense. Because looking back, you could clearly see a pattern of helping people step into their voice, claim their space, whether they were launching something new, growing their influence, figuring out what they wanted to be known for. What I once saw as scattered ideas, it was actually me refining the bigger message that was there all along. I just had to do this creative exploration. So when I launched Creator to Leader, which is this podcast, I just been playing with changing the name, but this podcast launched Creator to Leader, everything clicked into place. And it quickly ranked as a top 40 podcast, as a whole new show. I don't really have like a huge audience of hundreds of thousands of followers, but it ranked and it reached over 45 countries super quickly. I started getting comments and messages from all over the world, and it landed me media opportunities. And people thought it was an overnight success, right? But the truth, it was years of trying these quote unquote random things and exploring different angles and trusting that my voice would refine itself over time. So if you're feeling stuck, if you're afraid to commit to the wrong niche, I want to help you reframe this because your niche isn't something that you find in a brainstorm session. It's something you create your way into and something that you choose one step at a time. So if you've been waiting for the perfect niche before taking action, you might actually be making it harder for yourself because the fear of making the wrong choice is keeping you stuck instead of moving you forward. And I know it sounds counterintuitive because you think, and I thought, that if I made the wrong choice, I was going to ruin my life forever and my brand was going to be ruined and unclear forever and I was not going to look serious for other people forever. And maybe I had this huge vision in my mind and nothing that I chose in terms of words or niche, nothing felt like it did my vision justice. But in reality, I was staying stuck. I was actually doing my vision a disservice by not making a choice. And I get why. Like now being on the other side, I completely understand why. Because the advice out there is all about pick a niche, get clear on your ideal client, follow market research. And I love market research. Like I'm now figuring out a new way of doing market research that has blown my mind and I find so helpful. But for multi-passionate creatives, maybe for us, the way to find the right niche isn't just about sitting down, trying to pick the perfect one out of a random list, but maybe we have to create our way into it. So instead of asking, how do I pick a niche? I want you to ask, how do I create in a way that helps my niche reveal itself? Because here's the thing, creativity isn't about unlimited freedom, right? The freedom that we think we're gaining if we avoid choosing a niche. Creativity is about making something meaningful within a structure. And even the most creative artists, they have boundaries. And please don't cringe about the word boundaries. And I promise we are having some couples therapy with boundaries today. Come on, sit at the couch. We need to talk, okay? We need to sit in the same room, hear each other out. Because take music, for example. There are only so many notes on a scale, right? And yet, within that limitation, artists create endless unique songs, right? The same happens in painting. And I'm talking about very like traditionally artistic fields. But in painting, you just don't throw paint randomly onto a canvas and hope it makes sense, right? They work within certain boundaries, starting with the canvas itself. You have a boundary, you have a structure. Even if you're painting on a large wall, the wall ends at some point. So there's some intentionality behind what you're creating. And your brand, it works exactly the same way, even if you are not a traditional artist, right? We are all really restricted in some ways, starting with our time. Like that is the restriction that follows us day in and day out. We cannot alter no matter how hard we try. There are 24 hours in the day, so it's up to us, the piece of art we decide to create in that time. But that time, that boundary, we cannot alter. So instead of fighting the restriction, instead of saying, I don't want to be restricted, what if we embraced it, right? And used those restrictions as our canvas to really create amazing art, even if we are not in this traditionally artistic field. Like, I want to really help you expand your mind to what creating your work of art means, because once you do that, you're going to start seeing your work really differently. And there's this book that has been eye-opening for me because it's giving me words to something I've been thinking about for almost a year. And, I did a lot of journaling last year, and it's just a constant, you're constantly evolving with your voice, with your vision. And I realized that I need my work to feel like an expression of art, even if it's not a traditionally artistic type of work. Like, I'm not acting actively anymore at this point in my life, but I still want the things that I do to feel like art. So the book is The Artisan Soul by Erwin McManus. I 100% recommend it. And there he talks about how we are all creators. We all have this invitation to make our life a work of art. And even beyond the traditional artists like painters and writers and musicians, we're all creatives in our own way because we were all created in the image of God who created the world. And to say that we have the same power, but we have the same inspiration in our DNA. So if you identify yourself as a creative, even if you are, let's say, a coach, this concept is going to deeply resonate with you. Because whether we're designers or coaches, writers, business owners, however we identify ourselves as, even if our job is not to find a niche like it's a fixed thing, it's to refine our creative voice over time, to discover the unique perspective that only we can bring. But that is achieved on the field by creating. So how do you take action when you have so many ideas, when you have so many options? Instead of seeing your niche as something you have to pick and commit to forever, I want you to be open to this idea of releasing collections, right? I was talking to my husband the other day and I told him, you need to see, if you want to launch this podcast, you need to see it as a collection, right? Just like an artist releases a collection of work, the collection has a message, has a purpose, has a vision, and it's finite. You release that collection and then you reevaluate. You don't see an artist, a singer, releasing one album and that's the one album they'll release for the rest of their lives. They are able to evolve until they find their voice. Because just like that, right, with these artists releasing collections of work, your brand will evolve through different phases, different iterations, but each phase still is going to have a structure, is going to have a purpose, it's going to have a very clear through line. And here's how you can approach this. There are 3 ways of starting to think of your work in this or your creation process as a personal brand and building your niche is with this approach to collections. First, create within a theme. And this is, look at it as your first collection. Instead of picking one niche only forever, pick a theme to focus on for a season. For example, if you're a coach who loves mindset, you love creativity, you love leadership, start by creating content that connects all three and see what resonates. Think of it like releasing an album. This is your first collection. It's cohesive. And it doesn't mean that this is the only thing you'll ever do, but you need to explore your voice to see if this really feels comfortable, if it really resonates with an audience. Then number 2, follow the clues. And this is refining through feedback and self-discovery, because creation is a two-way street. That's why I love about just communication in general. Your audience will give you clues about what resonates. But most importantly, you're going to start feeling what lights you up the most. Because I know when we create, it's easy to think that we have to kind of chase the applause, whatever's popular. And it's not about that. It is just about noticing where your energy naturally flows and where your energy is matching the audience's interest. That is a beautiful soft spot. But if you don't create and you don't get the feedback, you are not going to be able to adjust, because everything is going to be based on ideas or conjectures that you have in your mind, right? An artist, they might try different painting styles before discovering their signature look. And the same applies to your content and to your brand. And then number 3, define your main message for this collection. What is going to be the anchor in your brand? And your niche isn't just about what you do, right? It's not about the what only. It's also about your perspective. And think about it. What is the core theme that ties your work together, right? Maybe it's empowerment or transformation or storytelling. That's what makes a brand or a creator stand out. It's not just picking a specific niche, but refining their message over time. And I do have a couple of episodes that I think will help you a lot. I have an episode that I'm going to leave down below on the difference between the traditional concept of content pillars and thinking about your content from a place of content themes, and the 3 core content themes that I recommend you use. And there's also one on creating depending on your strengths. There are 4 domains that are really helpful to start thinking or creating kind of a framework for yourself. So those are great episodes that you can listen to and start adding some frameworks around this idea of communicating your main message. But I want you to look at 2 examples that I really love. First is Sabrina Carpenter. She was the it girl of pop for last year. But she's been in the music industry for years, for over a decade. Like, she's a Disney kid. And it wasn't until her latest rebrand, when she launched the song Espresso, she had this little pinup girl look, and she truly blew up in a massive way, because she refined her voice, her branding, her message. And it wasn't just about making great music. For her, it was about locking in an identity that felt true to her and that resonated with her audience. And that level of clarity didn't come from day one, clearly. It came from experimenting, evolving, paying attention to what's feeling aligned to what people are liking. And another example, this is more from the brand perspective, one of my favorite brands, The Skinny Confidential by Lauren Bostic. She started as a blogger, and she was sharing a little bit of everything. It was this concept of a friend giving you an amazing, detailed resource on health, beauty, some fashion, and just life tips. But over time, she refined her voice. She launched the Skinny Confidential Him and Her podcast with her husband. And then she built the Skinny Confidential brand into a full-on beauty and wellness product empire. And so when we see her trajectory, we see that she's niched down over the past, I want to say 10 to 15 years. But nothing felt forced or off-brand for her, because the thread that ties it all together was, or is, her unique perspective on authentic voice. So she went from, I'm this friend sharing like my juiciest tips on all these topics, to now I'm very niched in, at least through the Skinny Confidential brand, in wellness and beauty. And then I have this podcast where I explore entrepreneurship and mindset and maybe some financial topics from also this idea of sharing tips and insights and making it very actionable. And everything driven by her voice. So every time she niches down a little bit more, everything makes more and more sense. So tying it all back to personal branding, right? How does this idea of collections help you find your niche? I want you to take a breath of relief because finding a niche doesn't mean that you are locking yourself into one thing forever. Okay? Okay, letting it go. Let it go like Elsa. Finding a niche or choosing a niche, a theme for your collection, it means that you are finding the right way to express your voice in a way that resonates with others. We're trying to find this middle ground. Because a strong brand is like an artist portfolio, right? Each collection you create might look a little bit different, but over time, your unique style becomes unmistakable. And that's what makes people follow you, not just because of what you do, but because of how you do it, because of your perspective. So if you've been paralyzed for the fear of choosing wrong, here's my clarity for you. Stop waiting for 100% clarity. Start creating. Start with the hypothesis. Pick a theme. Okay? Explore, follow the clues. Trust that your niche will emerge and become clearer and clearer the more action you take. Because clarity doesn't come from just sitting and thinking. Maybe for some people, but for creatives especially, it comes from making. It comes from refining. Your brand is an evolving piece of art. And the more you create, the more your unique voice is going to shine through. And if this episode resonated with you, let me know. What's one thing you're committing to creating this month? I am excited to hear from you. I think a collection could be 3 months. I think that would be super fun. Send me a DM at eugenia.wu or an email. And by the way, are you part of my free email community? That's bit.ly/ewu insider yet? Okay, I digress. But I am really excited for you to sit with this for a week, sit with this concept, see how it helps you evolve your brand so you can finally get started in building your brand, building your audience, to get unstuck on this niche thing. I'm super excited for you. I cannot wait to see what's the message that you have inside of you that you are going to share with the world. See you very soon. Un beso. That's a wrap on today's episode. If you loved it, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to a friend who's ready to show up confidently online without the burnout. Remember that sharing is caring. And if you want to make my day, please drop a quick review on Apple Podcasts because seriously, it means the world to know this show is helping you take the stage on social media with confidence. See you back here soon for the next one. Un beso.